They always said land was the one thing they're not making more of. But apparently, no one told that to the HOA, because they tried to take mine, and they picked the wrong man to steal from. I was standing on my porch that morning, the air still fresh with dew and the wheat dancing in the breeze, when the call came. My boots creaked against the old wooden boards as I looked out across the land that had been in my family for generations. This still wasn't just property, it was blood, history, identity. You don't just take that from someone, not without consequences. Frank, Sam's voice came through the phone. Type with urgency. You need to get to the county office. Now, I frowned. Sam Grayson was my lawyer, and a good one at that. Calm, methodical, always a few steps ahead. If he was rattled, it wasn't good. What's going on? I asked. He hesitated just long enough to tighten the knot already forming in my gut. The HOA claims they've sold your land. I actually laughed. A full belly laugh that startled the dog sleeping beside me. Double quote Sam. They can't sell what they don't own. I never signed anything. My deed's clean. Frank, he said quietly, you need to see it for yourself. Within the hour, I was staring at a folder so thick it could choke a tree, laid out across the county clerk's desk. Sam flipped through the pages like a surgeon going through an autopsy. This, he said, tapping one page, is a signed agreement supposedly from you selling 1,500 acres to Oakwood Hills HOA. I stared at the signature. It looked close, familiar, almost mine, but not quite. This is forged, I muttered. My voice was low, shaking with something between disbelief and fury. Sam nodded grimly. I thought so, but they already flipped it, sold it to a developer. They're planning to break ground in a month. That's when the world tilted. That's when the rage settled in. They weren't just coming for my property. They were planning to erase everything my family had built. My father had plowed these fields with calloused hands and a bad back. My grandfather raised cattle here before the highway even reached this part of the state. Now some smug suburban committee with a fake badge and matching polos thought they could just stamp their needy owls on a sale and pretend they had the power. I clenched my fists. Who signed off on this? Sam didn't hesitate. Dana Wetmore, HOA president, notary on file is his wife. Of course it was him. Daniel had always been a snake in a suit, grinning at me through horror complaints about tractor knives or my old barn disrupting neighborhood aesthetics. I ignored him. He wasn't worth my time back then. But now he had declared war. Back home, I pulled every document I had from the safe. Deeds, zoning exemptions, tax filings going back 50 years. My dad had kept meticulous records. God bless the man, and everything lined up. The land was ours, legally, historically, morally. But something tucked in the bottom of one of those yellowed folders caught my eye. A note, barely legible ink, faded by time. Parcel B transferred via inheritance C attached. Parcel B, I'd never heard of it. Curious, I pulled out the county maps, tracing the borders by hand like my grandfather used to. My heart thumped as the lines came together. Parcel B wasn't just extra land, it was 300 acres. Acres that extended beyond my known property and into Oakwood Hills itself. The HOA had stolen my land, but in doing so, they'd accidentally exposed that they were living on mine. I sat back in my chair, staring at the map, letting the gravity of it sink in. They thought they were untouchable, that they could file fake paperwork and bulldoze everything that mattered to me. But what they didn't know was that I held the real power now, not just because of what they took, but because of where they lived. I dialed Sam. Change of plans, I said, my voice low and calm. What kind of change? I stared out at the land, at the wheat fields glowing gold under the setting sun. We're not just fighting their fake sale, I said. We're taking everything from them. He was silent for a long time. Then, Frank, you're playing with dynamite. Good, I said. Because I'm about to burn their kingdom to the ground. The next morning, I drove out to the edge of what used to be pastel and now marked with plastic flags, surveyor tape, and cheap wooden stakes. That was the developer's handwriting. Developers like to act fast once they smell blood in the water, and thanks to that forged contract, they thought they had it in writing. But what they didn't realize is that real land ownership doesn't exist on a forged signature. It lives in soil, in lineage, in law, and I was about to teach them all three. I stood there for a moment, staring across the field where they'd already torn up grass and driven stakes into the dirt. Not far off, I saw a white SUV pull up. The HOA emblem was plastered on the door like a badge on Rockwood Hills Homeowners Association. Below it, their slogan, preserving our neighborhood, one home at a time. That slogan was about to age like milk. Daniel Whitmore stepped out. Tan khakis, pressed blue shirt, clipboard under one arm like he thought it gave him authority. I could already see the smugness in his walk as he approached me. Frank, he said with a fake smile, I understand this might be difficult for you. Change always is for some people. Forging a signature is in change, Daniel, I said. It's a felony. He raised his eyebrows, then laughed like he'd just stepped off a yacht. That land was legally acquired, Frank. All filed. All documented. You'll see. Oh, I've seen the documents, I said, pulling a copy from my coat. And I've also seen the original deed, my deed. Notarized. Stamped. Yours has enough mistakes to make a high school dropout blush. His smile faded slightly, but he kept that corporate posture. Chin up like he had lawyers behind every tree. Let the courts decide. Frank, this is bigger than you. That's when I leaned in, quiet enough that only he could hear me. You're standing on my land, Daniel, and I've got 300 acres to prove it. Turns out Oakwood Hills was built on a piece of my great-grandfather's estate land he transferred to my father before the township lines were ever updated. He blinked just once, but it was enough. Double quote. See, your HOA didn't just try to steal from me, I continued. It trespassed, built homes, installed fences, paved sidewalks, all on land that was never yours. He tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. You took 1,500 acres with a pen and a lie. I'm about to take your whole neighborhood back with the law. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with that clipboard hanging limp in his hand. Back at the county records office, Sam and I went to work. He was already in full war mode, briefs lying, calls made to title companies, and a forensic handwriting analyst on speed dial. The parcel B deed was real, filed in 1968, transferred through 3 generations, and somehow never corrected on the township's zoning grid. Until now, Frank, Sam said, looking up from his laptop late that night. You don't just own the land beneath Oakwood Hills, you own their easement, their water access, their road frontage. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means, he paused, grinning for the first time in days. They're renting their entire lives from you and they don't even know it yet. I could have left, but it wasn't funny. Not really, because these people, the ones who voted me out of HOA meetings, who filed bogus noise complaints about my harvest trucks, who slapped fines on me for having unapproved fencing, they were about to learn what it meant to pick the wrong fight. We filed an injunction that Friday, quietly, strategically, no media, no noise. Just a tight legal filing that hit the county like a thunderclap at 9:03 a.m. It named Oakwood Hills HOA as a defendant in a land use and zoning fraud case, and listed me, Franklin James Moore, as the sole legal owner of the territory in dispute. Not a single home in that subdivision sat on land they actually owned. We served them with notices door to door through the sheriff's office. A dozen residents came out confused, angry, then afraid. Daniel called me that night. You think this is over? He hissed. You think you can bulldoze people's lives just because you found some dusty document? No, I said flatly, you bulldozed my family's legacy first. This is me building it back. He started to curse, but I hung up. By Monday, everything had changed. The development project was put on immediate hold. Financing was frozen. The company that bought the land from the whore suddenly realized it had bought vapor. And then came the twist even I hadn't expected. Turns out, several homes in Oakwood Hills were financed through banks that required clear title insurance. Once the lawsuit hit the public record, the insurance companies pulled out, which meant the banks declared those mortgages in default. One by one, families who thought they lived in paradise received a notice that their home was now sitting on contested property and was theirs, or uninsurable. Some cried, some screamed, some tried to sue the whore, and Daniel, he vanished. Not officially, not legally, but his front yard was empty, his car gone, and his mailbox duct taped shut. Sam called me 2 weeks later. You're not gonna believe this, he said. The HOA just filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I let that sink in for a moment. They're finished. I said, they're desperate. He replied, which means we've got leverage. Bankruptcy filings are strange things. They don't feel like justice. They don't sound like victory. They're quiet, cold, just ink on paper. But when I read the official petition from the Oakwood Hills HOA scanned and emailed to Sam at 2:17 a.m., I felt something crack loose inside me. They were bleeding, not from a bullet or a broken window. They were bleeding from truth. Sam forwarded it to me with one line. They're crumbling. Get ready. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my porch. Same chair my father used to fall asleep in after long days working this land, coffee in hand, stars overhead, and I watched the distant glow of Oakwood Hills flicker in the dark. It used to disgust me, their cookie-cutter rooftops and solar-paneled smugness, but now I saw something else. I saw weakness, panic. They were no longer kings, they were tenants, and I was the landlord they betrayed. By sunrise, the local news had picked it up. Oakwood Hills HOA declares bankruptcy amid property fraud scandal. The headline read, "The anger woman called it a shocking development, but she didn't know the half of it. Neighbors who had once refused to make eye contact with me in the store were now calling Sam's office, some pleading, others threatening. But most were afraid, because fear spreads faster than facts. HOA meetings turned into war zones. The clubhouse, where they once hosted wine tastings and fake elections, was now overrun with residents demanding answers. I didn't need to be there to feel the storm. I had people inside now. One of them was an older woman named Patricia Knowles. She showed up at my gate in a gray Grella one afternoon. White hair, steel eyes. She had a kind of rigid grace that reminded me of my mother. She wasn't afraid to look me in the eye. "Frank Moore," she said. I nodded. "I voted against the HOA acquiring your land," she said bluntly. "They shut me down. Said I didn't understand legal procedure. But I knew it smelled like a scam. I didn't say anything, just motioned for her to sit. I've lived in Oakwood Hills for 17 years. She continued, "I've paid my dues. I followed the rules. But I didn't sign up for corruption. I came to ask you, what's your endgame?" That surprised me. Most people wanted to beg or bargain. Not her. "You really want to know?" I asked. She nodded once. "I want them humiliated," I said. "Legally, publicly. I want them to feel what my father would have felt watching bulldozers roll across the fields he died protecting." She studied me, then nodded slowly. "Well then," she said, "I think you and I might be able to help each other." Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia became my inside channel. She attended every meeting, took notes, recorded audio. Daniel hadn't fled far. He was operating behind the scenes trying to shift blame, rewrite minutes, reframe the HOA's actions as administrative oversight. But Patricia caught it all. And then she handed me a bombshell. She brought me a manila envelope one evening with documents that made my jaw clench. Inside were internal memos, emails between Daniel and a developer called Keystone Partners, LLC. In them, Daniel promised exclusive access to my land before the fake sale was even filed. He offered under-the-table agreements for zoning exemptions. And worst of all, he proposed using HOA funds to buy off county inspectors, bribes, fraud, RICO-level collusion. I called Sam immediately. "Get these to the DA," I said. "We're not playing defense anymore." The district attorney moved fast. Faster than I thought possible. They opened an investigation into Daniel Whitmore and several HOA board members. Subpoenas were issued, phones seized, depositions began. The community didn't just splinter, it imploded. Neighbors who once held block parties together were now suing each other. Half the HOA board resigned, the other half lawyered up. Property values plunged. And then came the counteroffensive. Because while Daniel was on the run from legal fire, the HOA made a desperate move. They filed a motion to condemn my land under emergency development. Provisions claiming that I was obstructing critical housing plans for the county. It was a Hail Mary, sloppy, rushed, and publicly visible. But it was still dangerous. Sam called me, voice tight. "They're trying to flip this. Paint you as a greedy land baron." I scoffed. "They built their dream neighborhood on stolen earth. And now I'm the villain. We need to push back harder," he said. Time to take the next step. So I did. I called a press conference. Small town, but word spreads fast. When you mention fraud and federal suits, I stood on the steps of the county courthouse, wore my father's old ranch jacket, didn't smile. Behind me, Sam held the original land deed. Patricia stood beside him. The media leaned in. I cleared my throat. My name is Frank Moore. My family has lived on this land for generations. We built it, fenced it, protected it. And one day, an HOA tried to steal it. They forged documents, lied to banks, sold what they didn't own. And when I fought back, they tried to paint me as the problem. But the truth is simple. This isn't just about property. This is about respect. Respect for legacy, for truth, for the people who came before us. And I will not rest until everyone responsible is held accountable. In every court, every hearing, every boardroom they thought they could hide behind. I walked off the steps to the sound of flashbulbs and shouted questions. I didn't answer any of them, because I wasn't done yet. It only took 48 hours after my courthouse speech for the first arrest to happen. Daniel Whitmore, former HOA president, former suburban God King, was dragged out of a gated community 2 towns over. Not in a suit, not in khakis. In a bathrobe. It wasn't just poetic, it was surgical. The DA held a press conference of their own, listed the charges one by one: wire fraud, mail fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty, criminal conspiracy, forgery, bribery. The words felt like thunder, each one another nail in the coffin of Oakwood Hill's illusion of control. And then, the dominoes began to fall. 3 more board members were arrested that same week, charged with falsifying documents, misuse of HOA funds, and knowingly participating in the illegal sale of land. And still, somehow, they tried to act like victims. One of them, Linda Rollins, actually told a news crew, "We were misled. Daniel made us believe it was all legitimate, but the emails Patricia gave us said otherwise." Linda voted twice to approve funds for the expedited title clearance. She signed the developer's welcome packet with champagne in hand. And she'd been collecting kickbacks disguised as consulting fees ever since. No, they weren't misled. They were greedy. And now, they were going down with the ship. But with chaos came opportunity. And I learned quickly, when sharks smell blood in the water, they don't care who's bleeding. One afternoon, Sam called me into his office. "Frank," he said, locking the door behind me, "we got an offer." "From who?" I asked, already suspicious. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was a business card. "Aurelius Capital Holdings, Inc." underneath. Embossed in silver, a simple line: "We build tomorrow." They want to buy all 1,500 acres, some said. Full purchase. First escrow, 8 figures. I blinked. "You're kidding." "I'm not. They'll pay you enough to never work another day in your life. They're offering more than market value, no inspections, no contingencies." I stared at the folder, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. After everything they'd done, after what the HOA tried to steal, after the graves of my grandfather and father still resting under a lone oak tree on the far ridge, they thought they could wave a check in my face? "No," I said quietly. "Frank." "No." "Sam," I said again, firmer this time. tell Aurelius Capital they can build their future somewhere else. I've got other plans, because see, I wasn't just trying to destroy Oakwood Hills, I was going to replace it. I called it the Moore Homestead Trust, a land use project designed not for profit, but for legacy. No HOA, no inflated dues, no invasive regulations, a true rural community, built around respect, open spaces, shared history, land that belonged to the people who lived on it, not to some power-drunk board of amateurs. I wasn't looking for vengeance anymore. I was building something my father would be proud of. And the irony, many of the same residents who had once backed the HOA were now desperate to join me. It started with a man named Tom Sanderson, former Navy, moved to Oakwood Hills to retire in peace. He was fined $500 by the HOA because his American flag was mounted at the wrong angle. He showed up on my porch holding the violation notice like it was radioactive. I'm done with them, he said. I'd rather pitch a tent on real sale than live another day under their rules. I gave him a firm handshake. You're not pitching a tent, Tom, you're helping us raise a barn. He was the first, but not the last. Over the next 2 weeks, word spread. Patricia began organizing town hall meetings in my old equipment shed. We put out folding chairs, a whiteboard. Sam came to explain the legal process. No fancy brochures, no marketing budget. Just truth, land, and people hungry for both. Meanwhile, the fallout from the lawsuit only got worse for them. Mortgage companies had begun calling in notes. Dozens of residents received letters stating their title insurance had been voided due to the ongoing litigation. They couldn't refinance. They couldn't sell. Some couldn't even prove ownership. Oakwood Hills became a ghost town with manicured lawns. The developers gone, their trailers empty, their promises abandoned, and the best part, all of it was still legal. Because I never threatened a single person, I never trespassed, I never lied. All I did was expose the truth. The land never belonged to them, the power never belonged to the HOA, and now, slowly, house by house, it was coming back home. But victory has a cost, and the enemy rarely stays down. One night, around 2 a.m., I was awoken by the sound of tires on gravel. I grabbed the shotgun, quietly moved to the window. A black SUV was sitting at the end of my driveway. Engine running, lights off. They didn't get out, didn't approach, just sat there for 5 minutes, then drove off. Sam later confirmed what I already knew. Aurelius Capital was still circling. They'd bought up small parcels on the outskirts, trying to apply pressure, create legal bottlenecks, spook the residents into selling. But I wasn't afraid. Because unlike Daniel and his boar of thieves, I wasn't hiding behind loopholes. I had the law, I had the land, and now I had the people. The thing about betrayal is that it never comes from a stranger. It wears a familiar face, shakes your hand, smiles at your kids, and when it finally stabs you, it doesn't miss. His name was Graham Long, former county clerk, semi-retired. He helped Sam filed the injunction that froze Oakwood Hills' assets. Friendly guy, wore bolo ties, brought donuts to court. He even walked the land with me once. Pointed out a few old survey markers that hadn't been recorded in decades. Good soil. He said, you could grow anything here. I believed him. I trusted him. So when I got the letter from the county zoning board stating that a motion had been filed to reclassify a 400-acre portion of my land as under development oversight, I didn't understand, not until I saw the name on the motion. Graham Long, filed as a concerned public official, endorsed by Aurelius Capital Holdings. It felt like being punched in the gut by a friend. Sam was furious. They're using him to push an eminent domain angle, he snapped, pacing the room. They want to claim your land is critical to future housing infrastructure. They can't do that, I muttered. They can try, he said, and Graham gives them the face they need. And neutral local, it makes this look like civic concern, not corporate greed. I sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't just the legal battle. It was the personal one. Every handshake I trusted suddenly felt hollow. Even now, after arrests, lawsuits, and public confessions, the wolves still wore sheep's clothing. But that night, under the stars, I made a decision. If they wanted to play dirty again, they'd better bring more than lawyers. Because I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Meanwhile, the Moore Homestead Trust was growing. We had 27 families, now some living in trailers, others in restored barns and tiny homes they brought in themselves. The community looked nothing like Oakwood Hills. It looked better. Real. Kids ran through fields. Ducks barked without fear of fines. Chickens clucked behind wire fences. No one cared about mailboxes or paint colors. But then the letters started arriving. Not to me. To them. Families who had signed on to lease to own parcels from the trust began receiving threats. Anonymous notices, typed, mailed without return addresses. This land is under federal review. You are trespassing. Failure to vacate may result in seizure. You are participating in an illegal settlement. We traced the paper. We traced the stamps. Sam filed harassment complaints. But we knew who was behind it. Aurelius. They couldn't beat me in court. So they started targeting the people I'd sworn to protect. That's when Patricia came up with the idea. She called it the Land Circle. Every Thursday evening, we'd host a gathering in the big shed. Coffee, folding chairs, a whiteboard, and updates. But more importantly, transparency. No secrets. Every threat, every challenge, every legal motion, we brought it into the light. We told the families the truth, even when it was messy, even when it was scary. And something strange happened. Instead of running, they doubled down. Tom, the Navy vet, brought into generators and wired the shed with lighting. Mariah and Darnell, who just moved in from Texas, organized a food co-op. Even the older couples pitched in, sharing recipes, watching kids, repairing fences. It wasn't a development. It was becoming a village. And suddenly, I understood something my father used to say. Land isn't just earth, it's who you share it with. But while we were building, the courtroom battles reached a new level. Graham's zoning reclassification motion was approved by the local board. That meant 400 acres of my land, prime flatland near the river, was frozen for potential review. I couldn't develop it. I couldn't lease it. For the first time, they had leverage. Sam was livid. They greased palms, frank, quiet donations, pressure on board members. This is Aurelius pulling strings. And Graham, he's been quiet. Won't return my calls. I nodded, not out of defeat, but clarity. This wasn't just about Oakwood Hills anymore. Audit was about every town in America where a name like Aurelius could show up and by the law. But I had one more card to play. One last ace my enemies didn't see coming. 2 years before my father passed, he quietly transferred the eastern ridge, about 200 acres, into a private conservation easement. It was meant to protect the oak trees and burial sites. It was never intended for sale or development, but I kept it off the radar. Until now. I called Sam. I want to transfer ownership, I said, to the trust, full title. He blinked. You're donating it. No, I'm anchoring it. See, that land had legal protections under state and federal environmental codes. It had been certified, recorded, and backed by historic registry, which meant if the trust owned it, the trust couldn't be classified as a temporary settlement anymore. It became anchored, legally rooted in protected land. The effect, it nullified the zoning freeze. Because you can't zone a conservation-backed structure as a development risk. Sam laughed. Actually laughed. Frank, this could unravel their entire motion. Then let's pull the thread. We filed the transfer. We alerted the press. We even invited Graham to a public Q&A with the families of the trust. He didn't show, but someone else did. A young man in a suit, nervous, sweating through his collar. He handed Sam an envelope before vanishing into the night. Inside, a cease and desist from Aurelius Capital Holdings, claiming we were using misleading environmental exemptions to obstruct lawful development. Sam read it, then looked at me. They're panicking. Good, I said, let them. I was fixing a busted fence post when Sam pulled up fast, dust swirling behind his tires. He didn't even shut the truck door. Frank, he said, holding out his phone, you need to hear this. I took the phone and pressed play. What I heard next stopped me cold. Look, Graham, you get this motion passed, and we'll handle the rest. We'll bury him in injunctions until he's got no choice but to sell. You'll get your seat on the regional board. That's what you wanted, right? The voice was smooth, calculated, but the reply, Graham, wavering, uncertain. And what happens to the people already living there? They're squatters on illegal land. Once it's seized, they'll be gone. Simple. I handed the phone back in silence. Sam nodded. Graham recorded it himself. Left a flash drive on my desk this morning. No note. Just that. So, after everything, the old man still had a conscience. Too little, too late, maybe. But that recording was a nuclear bomb. Within hours, Sam had submitted the file to the county ethics committee and the state bar. By evening, news anchors were playing the tape on local television. Secret deal between former clerk and corporate land buyer. County zoning process under fire after leak audio. And by the next day, the entire zoning motion to freeze my land was vacated. The vote was reversed in emergency session. The board cited irregularities and potential criminal coercion. Graham didn't even show up. He resigned quietly the same night. But Aurelius wasn't going to roll over and die. They were bleeding now, and wounded predators are the most dangerous. 3 days after the zoning reversal, Sam received a court summons. Not civil. Federal. AURELIUS had filed a lawsuit under the RICO Act. Yes. Racketeering accusing me, Patricia, Sam, and even some of the trust residents of operating an illegitimate cooperative to interfere with lawful business and housing development. It was a publicity stunt, a scare tactic, but it was real, and it had teeth, because if it moved forward, we'd be dragged into federal court, tied up for years, frozen, bankrupted, and buried under legal costs. Exactly what they wanted. For the first time in a long while, I felt it. Fear. Not for myself, but for the people who had followed me into this mess. Mariah and Darnell, who'd spent their last dollar to move here. Tom, who had built a greenhouse for the community. Even Patricia, who had burned every professional bridge to stand by me. What if I lost everything for them? What if this fight ended with me, alone on my land again? That night, I walked to the ridge where my father was buried. The stars were out. The wind was quiet. I sat down in the dirt, next to the old wooden marker. Dad, I said aloud, I think I've screwed up. I don't know how long I sat there, but before I left, I whispered something I hadn't said in 20 years. I'm not quitting, even if they take it all. I'm not quitting. The next morning, Patricia called. Her voice was trembling. We got a message, she said, from someone high up. Where? In the Attorney General's office. State level. I blinked. And they want to help. Turns out, we weren't the only target. Aurelius had tried a similar land grab 6 counties east. Quiet lawsuits, eminent domain, buying out city council votes. But they hadn't expected a bunch of farmers and teachers to start digging. Now, multiple counties were compelling cases, and our recording, that was the missing link. The AG's office wasn't just going to defend U.S., they were opening a state investigation into Aurelius Capital Holdings, and they wanted me to testify. So 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a panel in the state capitol, not as a victim, but as a witness. I laid out everything: the fake HOA titles, the land theft, the secret developer deals, the harassment campaigns, the forged zoning motions, and the tape. The whole room was silent by the end. One lawmaker leaned forward and asked, "Why didn't you just sell, Mr. Moore? Walk away?" I smiled, just a little, because my name's still on that soil, and no one gets to erase it but me. What happened next still feels surreal. A grand jury opened a formal case. Subpoenas were issued. Aurelius stock dropped 17% in 2 days. Investors began jumping ship. The lawsuit they filed against us, withdrawn. No explanation, no apology. They ran. And as they crumbled from the inside, Oakwood Hills fell with them. The final HOA board, what was left of it, officially voted to dissolve the association. The community's charter was revoked, liens were erased, and the subdivision itself legally decommissioned. Some of the homes were abandoned, others sold at auction. But the land, much of it was quietly acquired by the Moore Homestead Trust at a fraction of the price they once tried to steal it for. Poetic justice, maybe, but to me, it was something else. Colon restoration. By summer's end, we had over 60 families living under the trust. The school bus came again. A fire pit burned most nights. Kids rode bikes across dirt trails where McMansions were once supposed to go, and no one received a single fine for having the wrong flowers in their front yard. You'd think after everything the rests, the lawsuits, the full of Aurelia's side finally be able to breathe. But peace, I've learned, is a fragile thing. And betrayal doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it's standing right next to you. It started with a phone call from our title clerk. Frank, she said, we've got a transfer request coming through on parcel 38. I paused. Parcel 38. That was the East Field, the one we'd promised to Mariah and Dornell. They were building their dream house there. They'd already poured the foundation. Run that again? I asked. She hesitated, the deeds being transferred. Legally, signature verified. Looks like it was sold 2 weeks ago. I felt cold. Sold by who? There was a long silence. Sam, I drove straight to his office. He was there, sitting at his desk, like nothing had happened. Tell me it's a mistake, I said. My voice was low, controlled. He didn't even look surprised, just sighed, leaned back, and said, Frank, I needed the money. The trust needed the money. I shot back, not you. You sold it to a shell company in Houston. Don't even lie about it. He stood, defensive now. We're running out of cash, Frank. Legal bills, permits, utilities. You think those solar panels paid for themselves. You think building a town doesn't cost millions. You went behind my back, I said quietly. He looked away, and that told me everything. Later, I found the papers. He'd sold not 1, but 7 parcels. Quietly, off market, using legal loopholes buried in the trust's original charter clauses that allowed emergency liquidity sales in the event of fiscal distress. He never brought it to the board, never told Patricia, never told me. And the buyer, Trajan Holdings, LLC, a clean-sounding front, owned by former Aurelius executives. It wasn't just betrayal. It was treason. When I confronted him again, his defense was paper thin. I was trying to save the trust. He insisted. I made sure they couldn't touch more than 10% of the land. You gave them the keys, I said. You opened the door and told the wolves to walk right back in. He didn't argue after that. He just packed his office and left. But the damage was done. Because Trajan wasn't just holding land, they were developing it. By the end of the month, surveyors were spotted marking trees in the old orchard. Concrete trucks showed up near the southern fence. They filed a permit for gated community. Again. And the worst part, legally, they could do it. Thanks to Sam's rushed contract. We'd given them commercial zoning rights on those 7 parcels. 7 plots out of 200 might not sound like much. But cancer starts small. The trust residents were furious. Scared? Are we just back to square one? Darnell asked. Did we fight all that, just to lose it again? I didn't have an answer, because part of me wondered the same thing. But Patricia, God bless her, she didn't crumble. We still have most of the land, she told me one night. And we have something they don't. What's that? I asked. She smiled faintly. People who give a damn. So we got to work. We rewrote the trust charter from scratch this time with bulletproof clauses, locked zoning restrictions, and strict anti-sale provisions. It passed unanimously. We set up a defensive buyback fund, fueled by local donations and community investments. Every spare dollar went toward reclaiming the 7 lost parcels. And most importantly, we declared open war on Trajan Holdings, not with weapons. But with lawyers, inspectors, petitions, press, we uncovered zoning irregularities in their filings. We exposed their connection to Aurelius on local news. We rallied environmental groups to challenge their permits, citing endangered tree lines and wetland migration patterns. And slowly, publicly, we boxed them in. But they weren't going to give up quietly. They launched counter-campaigns, billboards, flyers, online ads painting us as radical land hoarders standing in the way of progress and affordable housing. They even tried to buy off Patricia, sent her a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen. She burned it on camera. And our next fundraiser broke records. Still, the battle took a toll. One night I found Darnell sitting by the foundation of his unfinished house, head in his hands. The project had stalled again. We did everything right, he whispered. Why is it still this hard? I sat beside him, stared out at the dark field. Because anything worth building, I said, gets tested before it lasts. Then, finally, a break. Our environmental challenge hit PAYDIRT. Turns out, Trajan had falsified part of their site surveys, ignored flood risk data on parcel 41. A whistleblower came forward. The state stepped in. Permits revoked. Construction halted. Equipment pulled, and the land quiet again. By the end of the year, Trajan sold 5 of the 7 parcels back to us at a loss. The other 2, well, those are still tied up in court. But the concrete's been cleared, the stakes pulled, and no one has come near since. The trust survived, the community held. And Sam, he never came back. I heard he moved to Nevada, joined another development project. I don't wish him well, but I don't hate him either. Sometimes people fall apart under the weight of legacy, but we did in single quotes we held the line. They say land is just dirt, but this place, it's more than that. It's where my father's boots wore grooves into the porch steps, where my mother sang to the wind, where I buried my shame and unearthed something better. Now, it's where people live, freely, proudly, together. It took 5 years to rebuild everything. Not just the land, not just the trust. But faith. Faith in neighbors. Faith in the system, even if we had to drag it kicking and screaming back to justice. And maybe, most of all, faith in myself. Because after everything they did, after the lies, the lawsuits, the betrayals, we're still standing. By year 6, we had our own council, elected by the people. No secret boards. No architectural review nonsense. No one fining you for your mailbox paint. Just neighbors, looking out for each other. Mariah and Darnell finished their home. Tom's greenhouse became a co-op. Patricia started a land rights nonprofit that's now operating across 5 states. And me, I kept the land, didn't sell, didn't subdivide. Instead, I taught. The local school asked me to speak about land trusts, then colleges, then city planners. Turns out, folks were hungry for a different model, one that wasn't built on greed. One morning, I got a letter, plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. It read, "You didn't just beat them, you changed the rules. You gave others a way out. I was weak, but you were not." Gee, I stared at it for a long time. Graham, the man who helped start the fire, the one who handed us the match before he disappeared. It wasn't redemption. But it was something. By year 7, the state passed a new land sovereignty law directly inspired by the Moore Homestead Trust case. It restricted aggressive land banking, made it harder for HOA letters to annex properties, and established legal protections for resident-owned communities. The bill was signed under an old oak tree, our tree, the same one my father planted back in 1961, the same one they tried to cut down for a tennis court. Now, it's the symbol on our town seal, roots deep, branches open. Still standing, we never renamed the land. People kept calling it the trust. And that felt right, because that's what we rebuild. Trust in land. Trust in law. Trust in each other. A few months ago, I got a call from a news producer. They wanted to make a documentary. They asked me what the story should be called. I said, don't name it after me. Name it after what we all lost and what we all took back. They titled it, The Town That Bought Itself Back. It won 3 awards. But I never watched it, because I don't need a screen to remember what we did. All I have to do is walk to the ridge. The marker's still there. My father's name, hand carved into cedar. I go there sometimes at sunset, just to sit. Sometimes I bring a glass of whiskey. Other times, just silence. The wind still moves the same way. And I like to think, if he could see it now, the people, the laughter, the fires at night, the kids racing across the old orchard, he'd nod once, say nothing, just smile. Some scars stay. The 2 parcels we never got back. They're fenced off, empty, never developed, because every time someone tries, they face 1,000 voices, a protest, a legal block, a whisper in city council that says, don't mess with the trust. So the land rests now, quiet, untouched. Maybe one day we'll get it back, maybe not. But even in loss, we won. I'm older now, slower, quieter, but I still wake up early. I still walk the fence line some mornings, boots crunching over gravel and dew, and every time I pass the old gate, the one they locked to keep me out, I smile. Because we kicked it open. Together. And if you're out there, if you're watching this, listening to the sand, someone tells you, you can't fight the system, you can't stand up to power, you can't save your home, you look them dead in the eye and say, watch me, because I did, and I'm not special, just stubborn, just someone who refused to let dirt become someone else's profit, and in the end, that made all the difference.